Zapruder's camera rested atop a filing cabinet not far from me. For a fleeting moment, I had a vision of simply grabbing and running with it, but I knew I wouldn't do that. Yeah, to have it right there, like, there it is. Can you imagine it? Like, as a reporter, the drive that you would feel, like, there's the story right there, and I know it's right there. And if I could just find the way that this man will let us gain access to it, then my paper and I'll be the one bringing the story of stories. Hello and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm Jess, Connell, and I would love to earn your subscription today. We are in the middle of a look at the JFK assassination through literature. We have gone through over 20 episodes digging into the things that led to the assassination, the state of various relationships from Lee and Marina to Jack and Jackie to other individuals involved in the assassination. We have looked at eyewitness testimony. We have looked at the play-by-play of the actual moments of the assassination. And now we are in the after assassination section. And today's is really interesting. And I have a fun thing to share with you, which is that you guys know, if you've been around, that my oldest son is a Marine. And a few years ago, there is a city here in the Dallas area that does regular lectures about the JFK assassination. It's called the City of Allen, and they host JFK assassination researchers and eyewitnesses and authors, and have a wonderful set of lectures. If you haven't encountered that, you should go check it out, that they have posted to YouTube. But occasionally I've gotten to go to some of those. And one of the ones that I got to go to was with my oldest son. He was back in town for a very brief visit, and we went up and we got to hear Darwin Payne. He was talking about his experiences covering the JFK assassination as a reporter that day in Dealey Plaza. This is him as a young man. I'll put up a picture of my son and him meeting when he is, of course, an old man. 60 years later. I don't think I took a photo, even though my son was insistent that I should. I just was like, oh, it's okay. You got the book. He wanted to get the book, and so he bought the book. This is actually my son's copy. But since he's a Marine and he travels, he doesn't take heavy items with him, so I get to keep it here. So I do have a signed copy of his book, but we are going to read a selection today about what his experience was like as a reporter, and we're going to get brought into some scenes that are very insightful, like the sniper's nest, the day of the assassination. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. I love these looks that we are getting at the assassination. One of the reasons why we are doing the assassination like this is so that we can encounter a wide variety of literature. This is the one that's coming next, you guys. It's Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas. A reader just reached out a couple of weeks ago and donated this copy, which I didn't have. You guys know, if you've been watching, I think just a week or two ago, I said, I don't have a copy of it. Well, now I do. Thank you, Jack. But we are looking through a wide variety of literature, from modern to old. We are even going to look at an article at some point and a documentary. So I'm even going to branch out beyond books. But in order to familiarize ourselves with a wide variety of viewpoints and researchers and perspectives on the assassination. So today's is Behind the Scenes, covering the JFK assassination by Darwin Payne. He was this reporter in Dealey Plaza the day of the assassination. So we're going to start actually with an interesting story. I recently encountered this man's interview. It is on YouTube in its entirety, and it is a fascinating interview. It's a man named Robert MacNeil. He was on the press bus in the motorcade many cars back from JFK at the time of the assassination. He heard the shots, and so we're going to get right into that moment. Robert MacNeil of NBC TV heard the first shot from his seat on one of the press buses. "Was that a shot?" he asked. Some said yes, others no. When MacNeil very distinctly heard the second and third shots, he jumped from his seat and shouted, "They were shots! Stop the bus! Stop the bus!" The driver stopped for a moment to open the door. I think MacNeil says in his interview that he actually physically, those old bus levers that would open the door. I think he said he physically helped open the door. MacNeil jumped out and saw people screaming in terror and others throwing themselves down on the grass. A few reporters got off with MacNeil. Others stayed on the two press buses, one going to Parkland and the other to the Trade Mart, carrying most of the reporters with them. So this is one of the interesting things about the reporting that day, is that there actually were a huge number of reporters waiting at the Trade Mart. That was going to be the big event of the day, where JFK was going to give a speech in Dallas. The motorcade wasn't supposed to be the big news. The speech at the Trade Mart was going to be the big news. And reporters like Penn Jones were there. But also what I've heard is that a lot of reporting agencies had their primary reporter stationed at the Trade Mart because that's where the biggest news of the day was going to be. And then others had their secondary reporter either in the motorcade or something like that. So that's just an interesting piece. But then even this piece of news, that there were two buses and one went to Parkland and one went to the Trade Mart. So you can imagine the level of reporting that was available for the ones who made the bus that went to Parkland, much more in the moment than the ones who went to the Trade Mart. So it's just interesting, and it helps us piece together how we all got the history that we have was through happenstance decisions like that, where one bus driver goes one direction and we don't know if they were told to go to the other way, but it's just interesting that through chance decisions like that determined who got the story and what kind of story they got. MacNeil, rushing into the depository, also saw a young man leaving. Desperate to call his office, MacNeil asked him to point to a telephone. Later, this man was identified because of the time and because of the way he talked about this young man as potentially Lee Oswald. After calling his NBC TV newsroom, MacNeil went back outside and paid a passing driver $5 to take him to Parkland. One wonders how Oswald, having fired 3 shots from the 6th floor amid a crowd of spectators and lawmen, escaped. So we get Darwin Payne's perspective. He is taking the government's perspective that there was one shooter, 3 shots up in the depository. I point that out so that you can know the perspective of Darwin Payne as we listen. He surely, as he's talking about Oswald, had thought it would be impossible to flee the building with a frenzied crowd below and officers who would have been rushing into the building. As it turned out, he was stopped, then let go. On his way out, Oswald caught the attention of police motorcyclist Marion L. Baker, who had immediately raced inside with his pistol drawn. Now, this is interesting. It says, as it turned out, he was stopped, then let go on his way out, none of which is true. And for somebody who's a reporter, he should have been more careful than this. Officer Baker and Roy Truly did not. He even says they spotted Oswald moving away. Well, that's technically true. Moving away from them, he was moving into the cafeteria. He was not trying to leave the building when they spotted him. No, he was up on the 2nd floor and he was walking away from them, but he had his back to the door. He was moving away, not out of breath, not at a crazy pace, not running. They just said when they came up the 2nd floor stairwell, they looked through the glass and they could see that he was moving away through the glass. So again, not running, not sweating, not hasty, not... So I don't like the way this is framed. I'll tell you that from the start. "Come here," he summoned Oswald as Officer Baker pointed his revolver directly toward him. "Do you know this man?" Baker asked Truly. "Yes, he works here." Baker, satisfied, turned away and resumed his race toward the top of the building. This all makes it sound like they were outside. It makes me angry that he would report it this way. Oswald was not stopped, then let go on his way out, moving away. That all gives one particular description that's inaccurate. So We need to be discerning as we go into things like this. Baker identified the suspect he had stopped as Oswald. To Baker and Truly, Oswald was simply an employee beyond suspicion. He was free to escape. I mean, you say escape as if that's what the effort was. He stopped, was not out of breath, was not suspicious, answered their questions, and they moved on. That's not escaping. That is someone who's in the moment, present, and then decides to leave. He was free to escape because the officer and everyone in Dallas had expected that any trouble associated with the presidential visit would come from ultra-right-wingers, not from an employee of the Texas School Book Depository. Having been too late myself to get inside the depository, I continued to question, especially those whose demeanors suggested that they had personally witnessed something beyond belief. My best information came from a distressed group of 3 or 4 young women. Their tears suggested the horror of what they had seen so vividly from their proximity. More than others I had interviewed, they were especially specific. My newfound but excellent sources said they had gone outside to find the best location. When the motorcade appeared, Kennedy was smiling and waving. President Kennedy definitely had been hit in the head, they agreed. They saw much blood and were confident that he had suffered severe, probably fatal, injuries. I found no others who had been so conclusive. Now they were returning to work in the Daltex building across the street from the depository. Their employer, they said, was Abraham Zapruder, co-owner of the Jennifer Jr.'s dressmaking firm, who had been taking film of the passing president with his Bell and Howell camera when the shots were fired. One of the women, Marilyn Sitzman, Zapruder's receptionist, was bracing his legs as he stood on an elevated concrete structure for the best view. He tells us that this structure, so we have talked about, do we call it a pergola? Do we call it a colonnade? What is it? It's a cement structure. He says it's called the Bryan Pergola, named for the city's founder, Bryan. So the Bryan Pergola. Her fellow office workers were a few feet away. Their mention of the camera especially caught my attention. Obviously, a close-up film depicting the shooting would be of critical importance. I asked if they would take me to see Mr. Zapruder. They readily agreed. One of the young women, a payroll clerk at Zapruder's office, identified herself to me as Mrs. Charles Hester. Mrs. Hester's first name was Beatrice. She and Charles, she said, had been standing on the grassy knoll near Zapruder when shots were fired. As I walked with them toward the 7th-floor Daltex building, Mrs. Hester gave me a brief description of what she and the others had seen. Here is what he wrote down, and he is using longhand, so certain sections are omitted that he supplies with brackets as the things he would have known to assume. He's writing down the essential words and then later replacing. So here's what the notes from that conversation said. I was waving at Mrs. Kennedy. I heard 3 shots. One other person heard 2 shots. My boss, Zapruder, was on the floor. A reference to his departure from the Bryan Pergola. Seemed like it hit him, Kennedy. Could see blood. Jackie grabbed him. Now, some 30 minutes afterward, they were weeping, agreeing that the president couldn't have survived such a shot accompanied by so much blood and matter. Still, they couldn't be certain as they grasped flimsy straws for the unlikely possibility that doctors might save him. He's going back and forth with his news office and trying to get statements. They're seeing Walter Cronkite on the television. They're noticing that he's avoiding any definitive description of exactly what the president's condition is. He says, from my window vantage point to Dealey Plaza, I could see more armed officers arriving. The building was barricaded. Certainly no one besides officers now was coming in or out. Spectators continued to come too. I kept my eye on the office door, waiting for Zapruder. Minutes later, a distraught, balding man in his late 50s wearing dark-rimmed glasses rushed into the room with his camera. Obviously Zapruder. I told Bates to hang on while I followed Zapruder into his adjacent office, introducing myself as he held tightly to his camera. Later, his granddaughter, Alexandra, wrote that he was in a state of shock, kicking and banging his desk. If he did that, I didn't see it. Interesting. I got him, he said right away when I asked him what he had seen. I can't talk. I'm too upset. But then he couldn't resist talking, and once again I took notes in longhand. I saw it hit him in the head. They were going so fast. The president slumped over with the first shot. He bent over and grabbed his throat. Second of 2 shots hit him in the head. It opened up. He couldn't be alive. She was beside him. After the last shot, she crawled over the back of the car. He's dead. I know the president couldn't live. But as we watched the television, Cronkite continued to be cautious. Knowing that the media and our newspaper would hold the same caution, I felt certain that the president's chances were far less hopeful than what Cronkite was saying. Yet the emotional Zapruder continued to talk. Yes, I got it all. It was just terrible, he said. I was standing right there looking through my camera. The president's head just exploded like a firecracker. You see it. Blood went everywhere. I wrote down every word. I knew it was a much-needed descriptive quote. Cronkite's tentative reports, Zapruder insisted, were entirely wrong. Zapruder, Russian-born but a Dallas resident since 1941 and a fervent Kennedy admirer, was convinced that he alone knew the truth, no matter how much Cronkite or anybody else might have a smidgen of hope for recovery. Zapruder continued occasionally to shake his head grievously, sometimes slapping his forehead with his hand as if to remove the horrible and unforgettable image. Can you imagine it, you guys? I am seeing that this week as when I'm recording this, it's just been a few days since the Charlie Kirk shooting. And this morning I watched a couple of videos by those who were nearby, and the emotions that they are experiencing, the trauma that they experienced right after the shooting, after witnessing a human being be shot right in front of them, is palpable. They are unable to hold their voice steady. Their body is uncontrollably shaking. Trauma is a real thing, and we're seeing it in Zapruder right here. The sight of Jackie's dangerous crawl toward the rear of an open-topped moving car with a sniper shooting from above was as puzzling to Zapruder as it was to others. Sitzman and Hester told me they believed the only explanation was an effort to escape the shooter's aim. Only several days later came information that Jackie had been trying to grab a piece of her husband's shattered skull or brain, a fact she confirmed. The seriously wounded Connell, still conscious with his wife Nellie beside him, heard Jackie exclaim, "They've killed my husband. I have his brains in my hand." With Zapruder's precise description, I reminded him of his film. He was keenly aware of its probable significance. I stressed that the Times-Herald would be extremely anxious to develop his film and that we would do it under any conditions he wished to impose, including payment. He would have none of it. Of course, I was mindful that the film might not portray what he seemed so certain about, but I didn't want to display doubt. Zapruder's consistent response was that he wanted to, quote, "turn it over to the Secret Service and no one else. It's too important." I persisted, although trying hard not to irritate him. I said he could turn it over to the Secret Service after he watched us develop the film. We worked regularly with the FBI and Secret Service, I said, and we could easily arrange this. The procedure should take no more than a few hours. The film, he continued to insist, should be turned over only to the Secret Service or FBI. As he emphasized this determination, I offered new possibilities. A Times-Herald employee could drive here to this very office, pick up him with his camera, take him to the newspaper, and from there call the Secret Service to come after the film. We could make that connection for him. But he would not be swayed. "I've got to be sure," he said. "I've got to make sure the Secret Service gets it." Interesting. I mean, what a moment and what certainty on his part that he felt morally clear. Only the Secret Service needs to have access to this. I've got to make sure it gets into their hands. Zapruder's camera rested atop a filing cabinet not far from me. For a fleeting moment, I had a vision of simply grabbing and running with it, but I knew I wouldn't do that. Yeah, to have it right there, like, there it is. Can you imagine it? Like, as a reporter, the the drive that you would feel, like there's the story right there, and I know it's right there. And if I could just find the way that this man will let us gain access to it, then my paper and I'll be the one bringing the story of stories. If you don't know, what happened to the Zapruder film is that he may get into this, but it was eventually given, yes, to the Secret Service and to Time Life magazine. And then they took that copy, printed only certain frames, the headshot frames withheld from the American people, and then they put it into a vault. And for 12 years, that's where it remained, with the American people having no visual cues of what actually happened in Dealey Plaza. 1975, it was released by Robert Groden on the Geraldo Goodnight America show, and congressional investigations reopened at that time. But of course, he doesn't know that's the future about to happen, and he's finagling. How can I get it to the American people through my publication? Cronkite continued to report that the president had been seriously wounded. By now, I had been with Zapruder for about 30 minutes, both of us hearing increasingly pessimistic reports. With Zapruder's absolute certainty, I understood that the president surely was dead. Again, as I think about what happened last Wednesday, there was a brief moment where people said, oh, Charlie Kirk has a heartbeat. They're trying to resuscitate. And those of us who saw the terrible video that I wish I hadn't seen, there was a wide shot that showed him just falling, and there was a closer shot. And if you saw that closer shot, you know what I'm talking about. But I'm relating my experience having watched that, where I knew once I saw it, he's dead. There's no chance. Like, there's no medical person that can resolve that. I think even if a skilled surgeon was right next to Charlie Kirk at the exact moment he was shot, I don't believe he could have been saved. The blood loss was too great. And that's actually what physicians have reported about Kennedy, that there was no means by which, even now, there's no procedure that could have made his head wounds somehow resolvable. Some people have speculated that the president, had he not received that final fatal headshot, that perhaps he could have been, resuscitated and come back to himself after that. But certainly the headshot completely annihilated that option. But this period of where you're pretty sure, but it hasn't been announced yet, I really can identify with that this week. And I know the certainty that he's talking about, that there's these voices of maybe there's hope, there's a pulse, and you're going, yeah, but I saw it. So I know what the outcome will be. In the meantime, he gets in touch with the Times Herald president. Doing my best to describe what Zapruder had told me, I suggested what I thought might be a good strategy. Above all, I said, Mr. Zapruder needed to be certain that we would take him and his film to the Secret Service or the FBI. If the film was good at all, I told him it should be sensational. Sensational doesn't begin to describe it. I mean, Robert Groden says it's potentially the most important 22 seconds of film that's ever been described, the most significant 22 seconds in history. It could be true. Historically, evidentiary, what it's done in terms of reopening a case into the investigation of a murder of our president. It is a significant film. I further suggested that Chambers could send a car here to pick up Zapruder with his camera and film, preferably a car bearing the words Dallas Time-Herald. Speed was imperative because I had no idea how long Zapruder would remain here. Chambers asked if he wanted money. That did not appear to have entered his mind, I said, but I thought the film might be unbelievably valuable. An offer of a fair payment surely would be helpful. Suddenly, I realized that in my first conversation with the Times-Herald's president, so he had never spoken with the president before, this was his first time, I was being emphatic in telling him how to conduct this transaction. It seemed an unusual way to start an acquaintance with my newspaper's president. Mr. Zapruder is in his office. Hang on and I'll get him for you. I said. Laying the phone aside, I dashed into Zapruder's office. James Chambers, the president of the Times-Herald, is on the telephone. He is the man who runs the entire paper. Zapruder picked up his telephone. I returned to my own telephone and listened as a third and silent party. I heard Chambers assuring Zapruder that the film would be well taken care of. "We'll pay you for it," he said without special emphasis. I was disappointed. The Times-Herald president sounded half-hearted, unwilling to make the commitment. I thought that we should be offering him $1,000 or as much as the newspaper could afford. Why didn't he assure Zapruder of a personal escort instead of letting him think he might be asked to walk or drive to the newspaper with his camera? Zapruder appeared to be waiting for anything to grasp, but nothing was offered. The conversation ended. So he's in the office. Tears are continuing to flow from various people who observed the scene in Dealey Plaza. I felt like crying myself. Zapruder was in his own office, his head on his desk. The office girls wandered aimlessly about, their eyes usually on the television as Cronkite elaborated on the dark news. There was no doubt in my mind that the attacker or attackers had been part of Dallas's extremist right-wing crowd. Rather than a single assassin acting alone, I envisioned a group of maddened plotters who had lain in wait for the president to appear beneath the depository window. With such thoughts, a great light suddenly dawned. I realized or speculated that I very possibly possessed an important clue that might help identify the assassins. That list of vicious anti-Kennedy resolutions given to me and other reporters at George Wallace's speech. This is very interesting. I haven't heard this particular detail, and I wonder if you have. The list of vicious anti-Kennedy resolutions given to me and other reporters at George Wallace's speech had come in envelopes bearing the return address of a schoolbook depository, not the Public Affairs Luncheon Club. The resolutions followed the same disturbing tone as the News's full-page advertisement and the wanted for treason handbills distributed anonymously the day before. How many schoolbook depositories could there be in Dallas? I knew of none. It was likely, I felt, that the envelope's return address was that of the Texas Schoolbook Depository itself. So he had received this list of problems with Kennedy that had a schoolbook depository return address. Okay, I've just looked through as much as I can of the book, just scanning for any future mention of this. I've looked through the index. It's not very helpful, honestly. So if you know about that printout, he talked about a handbill or a list of anti-Kennedy resolutions that was handed out at George Wallace's speech in envelopes bearing the return address of a schoolbook depository. I want to know the answer to that question. Was it the address of this schoolbook depository? And if not, was there any connection between the two? Is there some connection to, like we see in Guy Bannister's building in New Orleans, of legitimate FBI activities happening in the same building as CIA operations that are divisive printouts of political activity? And you guys, here's the thing. I know some of you may even be angry at me mentioning Charlie Kirk's assassination, but whatever side of the political divide you find yourself on, what I want us to see through the old assassinations and by pointing to the current assassination that just happened is that the elite political class, whatever you want to call them, the deep state, the military-industrial complex, the existing bureaucracy of people who are going to remain in power and going to remain in positions regardless of who is in office, okay? Whatever you want to call those people, I want you to ask yourself, who benefits when the extremes on each side of a political divide are stoked and are angry at each other? Who benefits? We don't benefit. The leaders of those movements do not benefit because they get assassinated, whether it's 1963, 1968, or 2025. People who speak political speech and are assassinated, they are not benefiting from it. Even those who hold those beliefs are not benefiting from it. Who is benefiting from it? When we are targeted at each other and not examining the class of people who actually possess power, what is happening in our culture? That's what I want to leave you with. It's what we should have asked here. It's why we need to look into, why was Lee Oswald in a building that was inhabited by legitimate government operations printing handbills for a one-member Fair Play for Cuba committee? Why was he in contact with Cuban revolutionaries who were overseen by George Joanides, a man who later would inform and be the CIA liaison to the HSCA, and failed to communicate to him that his group that he had overseen was in league and was coordinating activities with Lee Oswald? Why was all of that happening? And is that a sign of our political class seeking to keep the extremes frothing at the mouth with anger at one another? And therefore, what should you and I do when it comes to extreme political speech? My view is that any political speech not only should be allowed, but that we should all as Americans stand up and protect it. That every political viewpoint can come into the light, and we should all welcome that, even if it's speech that we loathe. And the reason why is because then when it comes out into the light, we can say, you know what? The KKK is abhorrent. And you have expressed every view that you have, and I still find it abhorrent. Here is all the things you believe. No one has hidden it. No one has forced it into a dark corner where it can fester and grow and become malignant. No, it's come into the light, and we can all say, this is an abhorrent belief. I hate it. I disagree with it. You can say it all you want to. And in fact, I want you to be able to say it because this is America, where you can express any belief that you legitimately hold in your heart. You are not just vaguely permitted, or I guess it's okay. That's not how we do it in America. The way we do it in America is say whatever you actually think. And not just say it, but I will defend it. I will put my life on the line. I will put my sons' lives on the line so that every American gets to say what they really feel. They get to believe what they really think. They get to publish it. They get to meet about it. These are the things that we hold first in our Bill of Rights. And if you feel like I'm angry, I am. I'm angry about assassination. I'm angry about assassination when it happens in 1963, when it happens in 1968 to a man who was so persuasive and amazing that he was bringing about real change in America, and he was gunned down in Memphis. I'm angry when it's JFK's brother. I'm angry when it's Charlie Kirk in 2025. I don't think that anyone should be assassinated for speech. But I say all that to say, even views that we hate should be able to be printed, should be able to be spoken. But I want to know who's doing it. It's particularly significant to me when it is done by someone from a building that is cooperating with the FBI, as was the case with the Fair Play for Cuba handbills. And I wonder if it's the case for these. That's why I think this particular detail is significant. And it comes to us through a man who was a reporter and said he might have held information that was evidentiary. I don't see him follow up on this, and I wish that I got to see it, but I don't. So if you know about it, let me know. It does give us this potential follow-up, but I don't see any more after this. It says, while the luncheon club itself, so the luncheon club was the public affairs luncheon club. That's where the envelopes came to his hands. He says, while the luncheon club itself no doubt consisted primarily of more respectable ultra-conservatives, whoever prepared those resolutions also may have provided the envelopes. The envelope and resolutions were on my desk in the newsroom. As I contemplated the matter, it dawned on me that someone in that group or someone with connection to it could have plotted the assassination. As one local minister was to say a few days later, he had heard a member of his congregation say at a party that he likely would have taken a shot at the president himself. So he is interested in that lead. I am too, but I also want to reflect that we have seen these attitudes in 2025. We saw them in 2024 when people expressed disappointment that shots that had been taken at then presidential candidate Trump had missed. So we see these hateful attitudes that are in Dallas in 1963 being echoed in 2025. Police reporters often think they can recognize detectives or FBI agents by their clothing or manner. I had this feeling when the office door opened and 3 men in dark suits appeared, displaying an air of confidence. When the last man in the group entered, I felt that my suspicions were right. For although he wasn't a detective or an FBI agent, he was someone I recognized as Harry McCormick, a veteran and renowned police reporter for the Dallas Morning News. With him was Forrest Sorrells, the Secret Service agent in charge of the Dallas office. And later, I would learn that the third well-dressed man was none other than Zapruder's business partner, Erwin Schwartz, who had shown them the way to Zapruder's office. Sorrells had helped plan the JFK motorcade route through Dallas. McCormick knew him well. When shots were fired at Dealey Plaza, Sorrells was riding in a lead car with Police Chief Curry. McCormick was already at the Trade Mart luncheon when he learned that shots had been fired. He saw among the frenzied crowd the visibly distraught Zapruder with his camera. McCormick asked him if he had pictures. Zapruder said he did, but refused McCormick's importunities to go with him to the news to develop the film. But he had brought these men, they're there, and Darwin Payne feels they start pressuring him to leave, and he says, but I had been with Zapruder and his camera for so long, doing my best to get his film for the Times-Herald. To allow Sorrells and McCormick to take it away was an appalling thought. No doubt I would see at least a frame from Zapruder's film next morning in the news, but I decided if I had to leave, so did McCormick. How about McCormick then? If he's in there, then I have to be. Well, he'll have to leave too, Sorrells said. So they leave. When the office door opened, Sorrells, accompanied by Zapruder, holding tightly to his camera and followed by Schwartz and McCormick, walked toward an elevator at the rear of the building. I raced after them to ask where they were going, but they would not respond. So it's very interesting. You can just imagine, and even still the day that we saw him speak, Darwin Payne was expressing this it was right there. The story was right there. I could have had the Zapruder film if my higher up had been supportive, if somehow I could have persuaded him. Like, I almost had that story. It's like the one that got away. So you can feel that disappointment for him and feel it alongside of him as a reporter. That would indeed be discouraging. So now we find him back in Dealey Plaza. He gets word from an inspector. He says, Inspector J.H. Sawyer, a Dallas detective, emerged from the depository with news. He had details of the assassin's hiding place on the 6th floor. The shooter, he said, had fired the shots from the depository's corner window facing Elm Street. Officers had found on the floor 3 empty shell holes and a rifle. What kind of rifle? It might have been a Japanese rifle, Sawyer said. It wasn't as large as a .30-06, and it looked like a 25 or a 30. As for additional suspects, Sawyer didn't know. He also describes a moment when 2 other Dallas detectives, L.D. Montgomery and Lieutenant Marvin Johnson, emerged from the building, displaying what was believed to be the important evidence tying the assassin to the crime. So here we have this bag, the long paper sack in which the supposed assassin had hidden his rifle. He says, that's me at the right. So here we have this photo of the paper bag that we have had an episode about already. But this was the finding of evidence, and there's Darwin Payne on the scene. He says in the next few minutes, at approximately 2:45 p.m., something unexpected happened. Detectives invited a small group of us, reporters and photographers, to accompany them into the building to see where the evidence had been found on the 6th floor. So there's a group of those who were still hanging around. A lot of people had gone to Parkland. They had gone away from the scene, or they were talking to various people, but there were just a few reporters remaining in Dealey Plaza. He says we were admitted to the building, and the police chief had instructed our group that we should be shown the shooter's site, probably as a sign of police cooperation with the press. Detective Dellinger led us upward on the open door freight elevator, moving so slow that we could see each floor on the way up. So we get a description of that elevator, that it was slow, that you could see each floor on the way up. On the second floor, we saw an officer armed with a rifle, another on the rifle with the fifth floor. We stopped at the sixth floor where 5 other officers were posted. The large room, otherwise unoccupied, seemed to just be waiting for us. It was eerily quiet, and so were we. It was odd that the assassin who had fired shots from this relatively remote corner would be able to escape unnoticed from the 6th to the 1st floor. Why hadn't some of the other workers seen him racing downstairs? Wouldn't they have suspected something right away? Well, those are good questions, Darwin Payne, because if you don't know, there are 2 women who were descending on the stairs from, I believe, the 3rd or 4th floor down to the 1st floor at the same time that Baker and Truly were coming up from the ground floor to the 1st floor. These ladies came down immediately following the shooting, they said. They did not see Oswald, and these men are coming up and they see Oswald in this 2nd floor cafeteria. So I want you to picture that. These 2 ladies are coming down, these 2 men are coming up, and they see Oswald here exactly where he was a few minutes before the shooting. There's very good reason to think that Oswald never was on the 6th floor that day, that he did not take a shot. And the testimony of Victoria Adams, I believe her name is, and the other woman whose name escapes me, combined with Marion Baker and Roy Truly, is significant. We all need to sit with that. These 2 ladies were descending. They see no man hastily exiting the 6th floor. These 2 men come in. They don't see a man who's out of breath and in a panic or trying to regulate his breath. They see a man who's got a Coke. He's slightly walking away from them. He's not out of breath. He doesn't seem abnormal. If you're interested in the other one, it's called The Girl on the Stairs. If you're interested in Victoria Adams and her story, there's a man named Barry Ernst, I believe his name is. I don't have the book. I would love the book. It's one that's on my list for sure in the future. But he tracked down this woman and he asked her, and indeed her story was exactly what she claimed. But here is Darwin Payne in that 6th floor window, what's called the sniper's nest. He says someone pointed out the approximate locations where the president had been hit. Not too difficult a shot, we all agreed. Here it shows these reporters there at the window. There they are. And this is the moment where we all get this classic shot. It says photographer William Allen and 2 other photographers in our group recorded the same view the assassin had seen from the window. So there's a box in front. There's actually a pipe right here that went in front of the window. This windowsill is very low to the ground. I believe it's like knee level maybe. So you would have really had to get down in and kind of jangle yourself down in there between the box and the pipe. It's a very difficult shot. And it just adds more complexity to an already bad aiming rifle with 3 shots to get off in a ridiculous short amount of time. So anyway, that is our look. I'm not going to continue reading, but I do want to let you know his book, as I glanced through, it continues on. He goes to the house on Beckley, where I just recently did an interview with Mrs. Pat Hall. She was the granddaughter of the woman who owned Oswald's boarding house. Well, he was there, and it shows him, it gives firsthand account of talking with Earlene Roberts, the housekeeper who saw Oswald come back and could date the exact time. It has his whole questioning of the boarding house and all the things he learned about it and more. So this book is one that you may wish to get. It's called Behind the Scenes, Covering the JFK Assassination by Darwin Payne. So if you are interested, there is always links in the show notes to where you can purchase those books. So that is what we're doing for that. Next time, you guys, come back, we are going to be looking at the evidence in 6 seconds in Dallas. We're going to be looking at ballistics evidence, gun evidence. You guys know that's not my particular expertise. I have a lot to learn, and this book is the one for us. And I'm so thankful to Jack for sending it. Thank you so much for sharing your treasure with us. I want to do it justice, and I want to learn. One of the wonderful things about Josiah Thompson, he is one of the only researchers that was alive and doing research from the very beginning. This book was written in 1967. Josiah Thompson, 6 seconds in Dallas. Come back for that. We will be looking at ballistics. I can't wait. I'm so excited to learn more from this man and from this book. So come back for that. Let me know in the comments what you think. I know that some of you may have an issue with any mention of modern political things, but I want you to understand that the people in 1963 felt just as vitriolic about whichever side of politics they found themselves on. And you know what? It was ugly when it went into political violence. And it's ugly in 2025 when even extreme political views get turned into political violence against those who speak them. So that's my thought on that. If you get ugly in the comments, as always, any personal comments, whether against me or another commenter, will be deleted without question. If it just gets a little bit ugly, then sometimes I'll give a warning. I try to be gracious in that, but the minute you get personal, it's done. We're done. But you can say whatever you wish in regard to actual beliefs, and whether it's in regard to the case or something I've said. So that's that. I hope you have a wonderful day. Come back next time for Josiah Thompson. Can't wait to do that with you. We'll see you soon. Bye.